Okay, so looking closely at this stuff, of course, initially everything looks kind of similar. And speaking about the issues that we're having where the kit from Tater didn't include this block, he's sending that as I mentioned. But looking more closely at this switch, initially looks the same. You got this pin, that pin, that pin, that pin. So these are the same. The one that is not is this one. Now this is the one that came out of the recall kit from Tater. This is the one that came from that DS740. This one doesn't have this tab here. Now, the original switch, this is the one out of the car. Of course, it doesn't have it either. So the replacement, the standard part, looks like it would replace it tit for tat. If you notice here too, this also doesn't have the second spade that both of these do. You notice it has a horizontal and a vertical spade. Same here. This one only has this one, and I know there's the one wire that connects to it. So I'm not sure if, because in the DS740 kit, there are no more wires than the factory harness. This is the harness here. There's 9 wires here. Okay. In the recall kit, there's also 9 wires. Okay, so there's not an extra wire to hook anything to. So I'm not even sure, because remember, this is the one that comes out of the recall kit. And there are no more wires to connect to it. There is the one that connects to this, which connected to that. That's factory. Okay, so I'm assuming, unless I find out something else, that this one and that one won't be used, just this one. And because, like I said, if this recall kit was for a van, and remember, this is the one that I crossed the recall kit for and got. I got a factory replacement switch, which I've since returned, because I ended up, obviously, I was going to go with the recall. Then when I found the connector melted up, so no need for that switch. But that switch is available separately, and I believe it looked exactly like this. It just had the one spade on here. So I'm assuming that if this is the recall kit for the van and this is the crossed kit from the aftermarket, they both have, well, the strange thing is they both have these 2 spades, but it doesn't, this one doesn't have that. That's the only difference I've seen. However, I am noticing something different on the factory harness compared to the replacement harness. And even the wires, like I said, in this kit here, it only gives you the wires. You have to actually push them into the block and snap them into the block, and then you put that little lock on there. Or look at this more as a lock/separator. It keeps the wires separated from each other in here. And that is, and I'll show you here in just a second. This is that melted factory harness. Now, looking, each wire over there in those kits have only 1 wire per terminal that goes into it. By the way, this is that one connector that attaches to that spade. It's a 2-wire connector, so it must be for a ground or whatnot. And it uses 2 sources of grounding. So when you look at the connector like this, the one that has the dual wiring on it is right here. If you notice, there's 2 wires that feed into this one port. They're 2 yellow wires. Okay, so I'm going to figure out what happens with that, because the rest of them look like they all have just 1 wire feeding into each port, except that one, and it's got the 2. So if we count these, I'm pretty sure there's 9 ports, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the blue in the back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, there's 9 ports, where on the replacement harnesses and such, there's 9 wires, but this one has 2 yellow. So I'm assuming since they come together, you could probably strip both of these and connect them to the one wire going into that terminal there. Okay, so that would be pretty much straightforward. And one quick note too, if you're going to take a pair of cutters like that and you want to just go ahead and cut through all of these, make sure your battery's disconnected. Make sure your battery's disconnected, because what happens is your hot wires in here, you bridge that hot wire over to the other wires. When you crush it down, you make like a crimp from one wire to the other temporarily before it cuts it apart, and you could short something out. Okay, so either make sure your battery's disconnected when you do that, or you cut them one by one when you cut them. Okay, just making sure y'all don't do something stupid like I would do. But yeah, you definitely want to cut them singularly if you've left the battery connected, or disconnect the battery, then you can have at it and cut them all at once. All right. I'll note also that one of the other changes on here, and y'all probably saw it before I told you, both the kits have this piece here, but the stock one doesn't have it. So this spade goes up into both of these here. I don't know what that's about, but it looks like no matter what, this is riveted into the steel body, and this terminal here is part of the steel body. So I can't imagine it's anything more than maybe a ground, a secondary ground maybe. It's possible. But yeah, so that's the other difference I see on the switches. They all look the same. As far as the side and stuff goes, and then of course this side here with all the terminals, if we look closely, we got 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, and then in the same locations 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. So they're all the same, and it looks like they're all connected the same if we follow the bridge around here, and all that stuff. So but that's the only differences I see. All this stuff here is the same. Like I said, on the sides, I don't see any difference between the stock one and the 2 replacement kits. All right, so just a bit more on that. So once we find, the differences between the switches, you kind of start noticing some differences in the wiring harness. So like I said, there's 9 ports or 9 cavities on the stock harness. There's 9 cavities on the replacement harness block. So the difference is there are going to be some differences in the color. Okay, so it doesn't look like it matters if you get the standard one or if you get the factory replacement kit. There is some differences in the coloring. So what you'll need to do is, it doesn't really matter as far as the coloring, believe it or not. You just want to make sure of one thing, and it's pretty important, is the gauge of the wire. Like I found, at least in the factory harness kit, there's 4 different gauges of wire. There's 3 of one, 4 of another, 1 of one, and then 1 large gauge wire. On the connector, you'll see there's a pink wire right here that's a pretty thick gauge, and then there's this red and green wire that's a pretty thick gauge. The rest of them end up being more like this gauge, whereas this is the tiniest gauge of wires you'll have. I've looked on this. Now some of these wires, there are some of the same coloring in here, and then there's some that aren't. So when you're doing this replacement, like you have this, there's your red and green, and there's your thick red and green one there. Yellow and black, you have a yellow and black one right here in this mess, and then here's a yellow and black too. So as far as you're going to want to do it, sure, go ahead and color mate them, for whatever in the future. But the factory harness, the factory one, there's actually 2 cavities that has double wiring to it. There's two yellows that go into it. I'll show you that are pretty much a gauge of wire, much like this. And then there's two more. There's another cavity that has two wires that are kind of like the gauge of this thinner gauge right here. So in terms of wires coming out of the harness, the main electrical harness, there's 11. In terms of cavity for this, there's only 9. So where there's 2 coming out of the harness that go into the same cavity, you'll want to make sure to, obviously splice those into the single wire. But again, it's not so important about the coloring. It's important about the gauge of the wire, because let's say you have this gauge wire and you end up using this gauge as like that goes into the harness. That's going to be a problem, because you have a wire that was meant to transport a lot of voltage going through there. Now it has this little teeny tiny wire to do that. So this wire is going to get hot and you might be back to square one. So just kind of keep that in mind too. And I'm going to go ahead and cut the connector out of the car, and then I'll sit here and I'll compare it to this connector here on the table, so it's a little more clear. Okay, so here we have, basically this is the factory cut connector, and let me get a little closer on it. If you'll notice, basically I've orientated it to where it's the same orientation as the replacement harness. So if you look, here's this one right here, and look, it's pink and white. Well, this one here is green and white, or sorry, green and red, and this is like let's just call it red and white. So, but notice it's the same thick gauge wire, and so that's important. If you go up to each terminal, some of these, like the next one here, this is black and yellow, and of course this one's black and yellow. This one here ends up being like a brown. That one's a brown. Sorry, that one and that one. Here's the first of 2 that are connected together. You see right here. That's 2 going in 1. And all they've done is, when they crimped this thing, they still use the one spade. But what they've done is, when they crimped it, of course, they stuck 2 in here instead of just a 1 wire, and squeezed it down and, of course, shoved it into the hole. So by you doing the same, by you cutting the wires back and taking the 2, twisting them together, and then twisting into this new harness, it's the same exact thing. As far as the gauge of the wiring, you can see here, it's not thin, but it ends up being pretty much about the same gauge as here. So in that regard, unless you wanted to take it apart and put like just a little bit bigger gauge wire in there, I'm not sure it's going to be necessary to do that. So here's one. Now this one in this harness is a little bit thicker, as you'll notice, than this one, this pink one right here. And I don't know if it has a line through it or not. It's kind of hard to tell. But then you got this center green and white, and then here's one that's green and white. You have this blue one here, and it ends up being kind of a light blue on this one. I don't know if you can see that color that well. But so yeah, and of course here, I don't know if I mentioned it, here's the 2, that's 2 into 1, and on this side you've got 2 into 1. So again, in that case, you're going to take the 2 wires coming off the harness in the car, you're just going to twist those 2 together, and you're going to feed it into just this one, and same scenario over here, into this one right here. And you notice at least black and blue maybe, and black and blue here. So same wire connection. So again, I was going to solder these, but it's going to be a lot easier to use these type of connectors I got, and I'll show you. So this is the connector here. And what you do is when you do it, you put one end of the wire through here and you crimp it, and you put the other end through the other and you crimp it. And then you'll use like a heat gun, and when you heat it, This is shrink tubing, and it'll shrink down and suck down onto the wire. And then also inside, what it does is it emits like a glue. There'll be a little bit of glue that comes out. If I can get this thing to focus. And that will further secure that connection. So you won't need to use shrink wrap or anything like that, because this in essence is your shrink wrap, your connection, everything. So, you know, anytime you use butt connectors, there is a little bit of resistance added in the circuit, a little bit. They say that soldering is better for continuity, but you know what? That's in such a poor location in there. I'm just going to do it the best way that I can, as easy as I can. It's already gotten further more than what I wanted. As I was saying earlier, if you have some of these, they come in different sizes. This looks to be about the same size as that one. So you could actually then take the two wires and just, but basically stab them onto here, and then you could just stab it directly into the orifice there in the block. Remove the other one if you wanted to. But again, more work, and in the end, you're doing the same thing, so I wouldn't worry about it. Like I said, I would just join the two, shove them into here, crimp it, shove the one wire into here, crimp it, then use the heat gun, and, like I say, Bob's your uncle, and you're done. So anyway, that's what I'm ending up doing. All right, guys, so you can see, one thing I recommend is to either take a silver Sharpie or something and orientate each connector. This is the new connector that I've just wired in here. I haven't shrunk the heat shrink down yet, but I'm about to. But I want to show you prior. And this is the old one, and of course I dotted that side as well. Main reason in doing that is because when you're up under here and you've got the different wire colors, and you've got, if this thing, as you're wiring it, it gets spun this way for some reason, and you go to connect the wrong wire to, which I did one, and it's very easy to do that. I was hooking up the green, one of the this one here that has the dual wires up here. You can see that I've basically just on the ones like this, yellow is a little easier to see. You take the two yellow wires and you wire them together, and then look, this wire is pink actually. That comes off that harness where that two double wire went in. So not only do you have to worry about which socket it goes in, you have to also keep in mind that these colors aren't the same. So by, marking it up and orientating it correctly, it'll help you keep a straight mind when you're down here doing that on your side, looking up underneath here and stuff like that. So that's just an idea to give you a little bit better clarity about what's happening. Because like I said, you don't want to hook up the wrong wire to it like I did. Thankfully, what was strange is, it was a power wire because it started to chime as if the headlights were on. And so, there you go. So just, my mess up, thankfully it didn't do anything to harm anything, but it could have. So what I'm going to do right now is use a heat gun, and I'm going to cinch down all these to get them nice and tight. And then before, well, you know what I think I'll do before that? I think I'll put that switch on here and just test it first to make sure that the lights come on and everything's good before I go through the hassle of heating these things up. All right. Well, guys, there's the chime, and the headlights are on. So that's good news. Of course, you hear the chime. Got the harness connected in. And of course I have the one connector there on that side spade. It goes on the side one. And then of course the little stick's just temporarily in there. So I'll go ahead and disconnect everything, or at least just unplug it, and then get it stabbed up in there. Well, I'll probably leave it plugged in and then stab it up in there and get it all set up. Easier to do that. This thing, make sure this seats down squarely. It kept wanting to try to feed in at an angle. Make sure that's all set up good. I don't feel any heat, nothing like that. Not to say it won't, but So there you go. Success.